In this episode, a budget microphone from MOVO called the X3-II. Let's go ahead and get you some sound samples versus the Sennheiser MKH416. Completely not a fair comparison, but that's our reference mic, the Sennheiser. So here we go.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. So the X3 version 2 is an affordable medium shotgun microphone, directional, meaning it will pick up what you want it to pick up and less of the sound around you and the noise around you, so that's fantastic. I think it has, for its price, a surprisingly rich broadcast-style sound when it's powered with 48 volts phantom power from the recorder or your camera with an XLR input. We'll come back to that and talk about that in more detail. It does include everything you need. It includes a Rycote shock mount, a foam cover, fur cover, a short XLR cable, which is made for if you're going to mount it on top of your camera, running it into the XLR input of your camera, a short XLR to 3.5 millimeter camera, same thing except if you're going to run it into your camera that has a 3.5 millimeter input, a padded removable hand grip, a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch adapter so you can put this on a boom pole, and then finally a zippered pouch. So really everything you need for $129. That is actually pretty amazing. So you can power it via your camera or your recorder with phantom power plus 48 volts or via internal AA battery. It does have a 150 hertz high-pass filter to filter out some wind and maybe other low-frequency noise like air conditionings. It won't completely remove it, but it will help. Be careful with that. It can also cut into your voice a little bit, especially men's voices. Not so much women's voices, but definitely men's voices. It will pick up less bass when you turn that filter on. Now, one of the things with budget microphones in particular is that they tend to be noisy. They tend to have this hissy noise that they make on their own, not noise that's in the space that it's recording, but just noise that they generate on their own through their electronics. This one did decently, actually. It came in when we did our practical noise floor sample. So I come into this room, turn off all the lights, turn off anything that's generating noise. I record some dialogue, and then I leave a silent portion where we record. I bring all that into post-production, boost it to a standardized level, minus 23 LUFS, and then measure that silent portion. That came out at minus 64 dB RMS max, with the bulk of the noise sitting closer to minus 69. So that's not the cleanest I've ever seen, obviously, but it's also respectable for a microphone of this price. I think it's definitely usable. The build is primarily metal, very, very solid, so it handles that well. There are a variety of samples that I have for you here. First up, let's do a Sibilance sample. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Overall, seems like it handles Sibilance nicely. Doesn't overemphasize it, so that's good. Let's also take a look at the polar pattern to see what that does in terms of how much noise it rejects from the back and the sides, and also if it changes the sound character when it's off axis. In other words, kind of coloring what you hear. So let's go ahead and work our way around the microphone. So here I am directly on axis. I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone so that it's 90 degrees. I'm now 90 degrees off axis, and I will continue to turn the microphone. Now I am talking into the back of the microphone, approximately the same distance from the microphone capsule. Now I'm coming back to 90 degrees off axis. I am 90 degrees off axis, and we'll go ahead and bring it back around so that I am 0 degrees. I'm completely on axis at this point. So there's again a sense of the off-axis coloration and how much it rejects at the back versus the front of the microphone. I would say that it does color the sound a bit as you move off axis, especially at 90 degrees. However, that's not unusual for shotgun microphones, especially more affordable shotgun microphones. But I think it's still, again, very usable for someone that is working on a very tight budget but wants quality dialogue sound. All right. We need to do a max sound pressure level test. That is, how loud of a sound can this handle? And I'm not great at yelling or screaming. I would not call this a microphone that's necessarily for recording really loud sound effects like jet engines from a couple meters away. And I don't really yell that well, so I do know someone that does.
I'm starting off in a low volume volume, I'm going to be raising my voice up louder and louder so that we can hear how loud this microphone can go. Because if it goes really, really loud, it should be able to take everything that you throw at it. And if so, it's going to be a great microphone to use for whatever you want.
You want a glass of water?
Only if you spike it with Advil.
It did seem like it was starting to distort some at the microphone. We were using the MOVO X3-II set to 32-bit float mode, so it wasn't the recorder that was clipping. And technically, the waveforms are not clipping, but it does seem like there's a little bit of distortion there. So even with somebody screaming, sound speeds, Alan, thank you very much. If you're interested in learning from a boom operator that works in the industry for television and film, definitely check out his YouTube channel, Sound Speeds. It did seem like it was getting a little dodgy there. So if you are planning to do a lot of screaming, maybe this is not the best microphone if you're going to do a lot of indie horror movies, for example. How about plosives? Plosives are when you say the letter P or B or sometimes even T. There's a little puff of air that comes out of your mouth. Sometimes that can distort a microphone as well. At normal distances, probably not as much of an issue, but let's do some samples here. Peter Piper picked a peck of purple pickled peppers. Not hearing any issues there. And with just the foam cover, Peter Piper picked a peck of purple pickled peppers. And without any of the covers at all, Peter Piper picked a peck of purple pickled peppers. So at the typical distances you would normally use a shotgun microphone, 18 inches, 45 centimeters, plosives are not really a problem. If you're going to use this for podcasting and get really close to it, that's when you can start to run into plosive issues. You should use a foam cover in that case. And what you might do is move the microphone off to the side, still aimed at the corner of your mouth, but that way when you're talking and you say P or B or whatever, you're not going to get that puff of air directly into the microphone, so you shouldn't have any plosive issues. We did some tests with a variety of things that generate radio frequency, including a phone and a wireless microphone transmitter. Near the microphone, we had no issues with Wi-Fi, with LTE, with making a phone call, with wireless microphones. And so this seems to definitely reject radio frequency noise, which is fantastic. We also did some tests to see how well this would handle wind, especially with the included foam cover and the fur cover. Let's take a look at that. Okay, here is the lowest setting. Setting number 2. Setting number 2. Setting number 3. Setting 4. And setting 5. Don't need to do a lot of that. We're going back to the lowest setting. Let's put the foam cover on. Here is setting number 1. We're hearing the fan, but we're not hearing the distortion of the wind hitting the microphone capsule. Setting number 2. Actually does okay. Setting 3. Not too bad. Setting 4. Definitely distortion. And setting 5. And utter distortion. Okay, back to the lowest setting, and we're going to go ahead and put the fur cover on. Okay, and here's with the fur cover on, lowest setting. Setting 2. Setting 3. Setting 4. And setting 5. Starting to hear a little distortion there, but this fur cover does better than I expected. So overall, I would probably say these are probably good up to about 10 miles an hour, roughly, winds. So if you're going to be working out where it's going to be windier than that, you're probably going to need the proper sort of blimp type cover for your microphone. But otherwise, these are pretty helpful. They do cut out some of the high frequency response, so you may have to do a little bit of EQ in post to get some of that back. So some of the crispness is taken out when you put things like foam and fur on top of your microphone. What about handling noise? So if you're going to be using this on a boom pole, which is actually what I would recommend, then it's really important that you have shock mounting, because what can happen is if you're holding the pole and you're moving it around and your hand is rubbing against the pole, that can transfer into the microphone and just create all this noise that you don't want. That's what a shock mount does, is it helps isolate the microphone from any vibrations of the pole. And the included shock mount did a pretty decent job. You still need to use good technique, but it's amazing that they, again, for this price, that they include a Rycote shock mount. So really nice. Now, I just mentioned about using the microphone on a boom pole, and in fact, this entire episode is being recorded with the MOVO X3-II right here, just boomed out of the frame in front of me on a boom pole. If you're planning to use this on a camera, it can sound very different, like this. Here's a sample of what it sounds like when the microphone is on top of the camera. The camera is approximately 2.5 to 3 meters from where I'm sitting right now, so pretty typical for an interview type setup. This is what you can reasonably expect. This is a Canon C70. It does have XLR inputs, so that's what you're hearing here. The MOVO X3-II into the Canon C70 via XLR input. When we're talking about budget microphones, a lot of times this will be people's first microphone that they buy. So I wanted to make it clear that where you position the microphone makes a world of difference. If you're going to put it 2.5, 3 meters away on top of your camera, it's not going to sound as good as if you boom it right out of the frame here. And that's not just this microphone, that's all microphones. It's the laws of physics. So just be aware of that. The microphone comes with a 1-year warranty, and that can be extended to 2 years if you register your microphone with MOVO at their site. And it is, as I mentioned before, priced at $129 US for this kit at the time of the review. So that's a fantastic price for what you're getting. Now, no product is perfect. Let's talk about some of the cons. First of all, when we attached this microphone, we put it on top of our Panasonic GH5, just a kind of a hybrid consumer camera, and used the included XLR to 3.5 millimeter cable and put a AA battery in the microphone to power it. This is what it sounded like. All right, here is a vlog example. I am talking to a Panasonic GH5 with the MOVO X3 version 2 up on top here, going directly into the Panasonic GH5 with the included XLR to 3.5 millimeter cable that comes with the mic. This is what it sounds like. I had to set the input level to -5. It ranges from, I think, 0 to -12, so it's about halfway, a little bit more than halfway. This is what it sounds like. It seems like when you run the microphone using a AA battery, that the character of the sound changes pretty significantly from my point of view. So I just want everyone to be aware that if that's how you're planning on using it, it may not be the best. If you're going to bring it into an audio interface or a field recorder with XLR inputs or a camera with XLR inputs, and you can power the microphone using 48 volts phantom power from one of those devices, it's going to sound more like everything you've heard in this video up to this point, except for that one sample that I just shared where we were running it into the GH5. So what I'm saying is that if you're planning to power it via AA battery and run it into your hybrid camera with a 3.5 millimeter input, the sound quality is, to me, much thinner sounding, not as great. I also mentioned this before, if you are going to put the foam cover and the fur cover on because you're filming outside, that's good because you'll prevent the noise of the wind from distorting the microphone capsule. But you do need to be aware that you're going to lose some of that high energy or high frequency sound. And you may need to do a little bit of boosting in post to get that back, to get that nice crisp sound back. And as I mentioned before, there is some coloration when the sound is coming from off axis, in other words, at 90 degrees off to the side of the mic or from the back of the mic, especially to the side of the mic, to my ear. So that's not unusual for a microphone, a shotgun microphone in general, but especially for a budget one. So overall, I would say that the MOVO X3 version 2 is a pretty darn impressive microphone for $129. Does that mean I'm going to sell all of my more expensive gear and just use this $129 microphone from now on? No, it does not. However, it is a pretty impressive microphone for its price. So I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. Get out there and make some great sound, and we will talk to you again very soon.